Welcome to On the Couch Conversations with the Warehouse. We are a non-profit organization based in Cape Town, South Africa, passionate about societal transformation through an engaged and justice-centered church. We believe that Jesus is never disengaged from pain, oppression, or injustice, and as such, neither should we be. Join us on a journey to explore what it means to emulate his ways of being within our context today.
Welcome to everybody who is here. It is really lovely to have you here for a conversation that I am really excited about, and people who are really incredible to be able to speak into it. So I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation. So welcome. And this evening is not just this conversation about theological formation, but we are also, goodbye is not exactly the right word, because Nkosi will always be part of the Warehouse family. But we are saying goodbye to him as a member of the Warehouse staff team. And he is going to be working with Mzwandile, who is on the panel today at ANISA, the Anabaptist Network in South Africa, in Joburg. So farewell, but also a deepening friendship and collaboration between people that we really love in Joburg. So we're really excited for all that tonight holds. Some people might be joining us along the way. So yeah, we will welcome them in when they do. But I think, yeah, let's get started. So my name is Thandi Gaedze. I am on staff at the Warehouse, and I love this work that we get to do to serve and support the church, living out the peace and justice of God for the world in many, many different ways. It looks like a lot of different things at different times. And a big part of that work is this thing of theological formation, which we're going to be speaking about today. And actually, we identified three different priorities for our work at the beginning of this year, with quite a smaller team and a lot of shifts taking place in the organization. We just felt a real need to really make sure that we're prioritizing the things that we feel like we're being called into. And one of these things we felt really strongly was this work of theological formation and intentional theological formation. I think everything that we do is that, really. But these learning pathways to help people deepen their theology for God's peace and justice and what it looks like to live that out in the world. So yeah, I'm excited for this conversation because we have such brilliant people. Co-hosting with me will be Nkosi Gola, and Nkosi is, so many things, a brother, and it's really exciting to do this together. But I took the introduction because I actually want to start with asking Nkosi a question, so that he can't actually, even though he's hosting, he can't quite get off the panel. Because we need to hear some of Nkosi's wisdom in this session, definitely. So I think we're thinking about this idea of theological formation, but I think maybe when people hear those words, they could have particular thoughts about it or think about it in quite a narrow way. And we're trying to broaden our understanding of it because all of life is forming us theologically and forming what our theology is, forming our understanding of God, our understanding of ourselves, understanding of what we are here to do in the world. So trying to broaden how we think about that, so that we can reimagine something different. So, Nkosi, how do you understand this idea of theological formation, and how are we formed theologically? What are the places where this happens? How does this happen? Would love to hear some of your thoughts about this.
Sure. Hello, everyone. As Thandi said, I am Nkosi Gola. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and really excited to be doing this with you, Thandi. And also excited to on this this new journey with Mzwandile and ANISA. I think it's worth mentioning that today is the 10th anniversary of the Marikana massacre. And I think maybe I must kind of frame it in that, in that, yeah, with that in mind. So perhaps asking the question, what theologically informed the concomitant action? I think I'm asking that question because Ramaphosa is said to be the former president of student Christian movement during the apartheid years. If the assumption then is that he is our Christian brother, what is it that would have informed such an action, that concomitant action, that sanctioning of death to take place? Of course, I mean, that is to downplay the role of others within that, the role of capital. But as the representative of the state, and also him being a Christian, what is it that is within our Christianity that can enable a Christian to have such a an order? And I think then if that took place within the context of the post 94 South Africa, I would want to connect that with the boat that came to Africa, or the boat that left Africa, where in this boat there was both, especially the boat that left Africa with slaves and slave masters. Will there have been a possibility that these people were praying to the same God? And what would have been that prayer? And to the boat that was coming to South Africa, where in the briefcase there was both the gun and the Bible. What is it that they would have read within the Bible that would have enabled them to come and colonize a people? For me, like, those are questions that I have, because I do think that there is a continuity in this, in that if in this same boat there could be both the slave and the slave master, and there is God, and the questions, I mean, around perhaps the slave masters would have been thanking God for this endless supply of labor, free labor, and then the prayer of the slaves would have been, save us from this. And I mean, that's more or less like the prayer of the cat and the mouse. I don't think that those can be the same prayers. I think those should be different in content, in that the prayer of the mouse must be saying that deliver us from evil, whilst the prayer of the cat would be give me this day my daily bread, or thanking God for provision. But perhaps maybe to the same God. And I think then the danger within the theological formation is that it has the ability to create a notion within the mouse to see itself as a cat. Perhaps that could be seen in this notion of Ramaphosa and the concomitant action, or the police officer in that uniform. Because as soon as they wore that uniform, they ceased. It seems like they ceased to be black. Even though if you go within those stories, you find that some still can't live with themselves since that event. Some have had mental breakdowns as a result of that. But what is it that would have possessed them to lead them to such a brutal murdering of that which looks like them? For something that they themselves would have been crying for. I mean, I've heard that the state isn't able to pay the soldiers currently. And I mean, there have been many protest actions even with regards to that. But then on that day, it seems like there was this escaping from the body, from those, from the murderers, in murdering people who look like them. And I think then there's a notion within churches where there's this church of the employers and the church of the employees, the church of the exploited and the church of the exploiters, where there seems to be this creation of acceptance of that reality, as though things should be in that way. And I think for me, the question there is, what is it that leads? So theological formation is what leads to the acceptance of that reality, as though it cannot be changed. A reality that creates prayers that are so small that they can be answered through the moods of white people in South Africa. Prayers that are so small that they can be prayed to white people and not to God. Or so for me, that's the problematic of the theological formation. And I think it's the theology of the boat. It's the theology of that boat, whether it's coming to Africa, it's going to America. It's a theology in that boat. It's the theological agenda of that boat, a theological agenda that will create people who are hospitable to their own pain, such that they would accept that those notions that kind of deify whiteness. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. So good.
Yeah.
Yo, thank you. So I'm gonna jump in, even though I'm not supposed to, but because firstly, actually, because I would like to comment or reflect just on some things you said, but also because I completely forgot to introduce the rest of the panelists. But anyway, now you've been introduced to the hosts. So yo, thank you for that. Yeah, just I think there's so much in there that I think is important, just to pull out these, what theological reflection is, and I think it's so important how you, speaking about Marikana and how these events, I mean this event that is part of who we are as a nation now, part of our history, part of our present, but seeing these things as actually a reflection and a mirror, and showing us what our theology is and what our theological formation has been. And I think as a critique of what that theological formation has been. And then you mentioned many different things as parts of the things that are actually forming us theologically, whether that is, you spoke about the uniforms that the police were wearing, and how those uniforms in that moment were shaping them into a particular kind of person who needs to do a particular thing in this situation. you talked about our different positions in the system and how that shapes our theology, how our prayers show us our theology, but also shape our theology, and how the status quo of inequality, these churches which completely reflect and are subsumed in the inequality of our country, how these then form us and shape us theologically as well. Yeah, so good. Let me introduce you to the panelists that we have today. All just really invested in this work of theological formation in different ways, have given much of their life to this and are currently doing this work. So I will go in order that I'm seeing them on my screen. So we have Mzwandile Nkuta, who is based in Joburg, part of the Anabaptist network in South Africa, and deeply invested in a theological education that is true to where we are, true to our African context, the work of decolonizing this theological education in different ways. And he's currently doing a PhD, thinking about some of these things, but just a really incredible theological voice. And you'll hear about some of the work that he's doing and thinking about in terms of theological formation in this conversation. We have Selena Headley, who is Dr. Selena Headley, because she recently graduated with a beautiful PhD looking really around this topic, and has done such incredible thinking and working towards reimagining a kind of theological formation that can lead to a world that is just, and cities that are just, and where people can thrive. So really excited to hear from you today as well. We have Caroline Powell, who is from the Warehouse team and involved as well in theological formation so broadly, contextual Bible studies. She's done many of those with different groups where people are shaped as they engage with scripture. She's, along with Keegan, part of the St. John's Leadership Academy, many different things, but has spent a lot of time thinking about space and spatial justice and injustice, particularly as it relates to the church, and how our theology around that is formed. And then we have Keegan Davids, who I won't call him Father Keegan Davids, but I just did. But just another really incredible voice in this area. I was actually with St. John's Leadership Academy, which Keegan currently runs and began, I can't remember how many years ago, but was actually hearing a little bit of that story yesterday of this dream for a different kind of theological formation that was birthed in him and deepened in him through multiple processes. And it's become this beautiful formation space for some people who want to become leaders of churches, others who are just really digging into this stuff. So this is the incredible panel that we have today, and thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to hear from all of you. Let me pass on to Nkosi.
Yeah, hi everyone again. Perhaps to maybe ask the question to Caroline. I mean, your understanding to this idea of theological formation. I mean, you can be in particular even around the work you've been doing in general, but including like the idea of space and spatial injustice. Like, what does theological formation look like in that space?
Thank you, Nkosi. I mean, firstly, I think let me say that pretty much everything that I I think about and share about in the space, and especially with the particular focus on spaces and places and how theological formation can be sort of shaped by the places and the spaces we're in, has been shaped by the people on this panel, as well as everybody else who, well, many of the people who are on this call, and many who will hopefully watch this recording. It's been, now decades of communities walking with me as I have tried with God's help and with friends and communities' helps to move out of isolated spaces as a white South African into new cities and new places and new communities in order to be theologically formed differently. And I think that it's important that I speak about that, because I don't think we can speak about how space and place forms us theologically in any way other than about the people that inhabit the spaces and places that we're in. So it's interesting to go to monuments and to places where things happened in the past, but actually, and to reflect theologically on what led to that. But actually, until you go there with other living siblings, working this out in our countries, in our communities, in our cities, for what it means for now, even those reflections will end up being like the statues themselves. And so I pay tribute and honor the people in the places that have shaped me theologically. And then maybe just to say that for my understanding of theological education is like trying to understand God together, and especially trying to understand God's economy and God's household together, and then trying to do that, like ask what faithfulness looks like alongside and with people who are seeking to follow God's economy and live in God's household, that I think includes all human beings. That's part of my theological journey. And so as we like, that is whether we think we're theologians or not, just as Nkosi and you have said, and Thandi, whether we think we're theologians or not, we're all being formed theologically if we're trying to work out those things. But then my particular, and many of ours, particular passion and interest in the role that geography and the spatial makeup of our countries and cities and communities plays is that if we remain in our spaces of origin, and especially for those who I think, as you described, Nkosi, were the ones who arrived as visitors on the boat, but who became rulers, and those who took people. I think particularly for those of us, if we remain in the bubble and in the small space of what we created in a land that we stole, our theological formation is going to remain formed by the worldview of being the oppressor, of being the ones that dominate and oppress. And so my own particular journey was that I knew I wanted to grow as a follower of God. I knew I wanted to understand more about God's household, but I knew I couldn't do that where I had been born. I knew I couldn't do that where I grew up and where I studied. And so I had to make a very short geographical pilgrimage in my own city. As we know, the boundaries in Cape Town are not long in terms of kilometers, but enormous in terms of history and division. And so the only way that I was able to be theologically formed to an ongoing maturing in God and in community was to make a physical move from where I'd grown up, from where I'd studied, and where the first phase of my career was happening, in the bubble, in the boundaries of my origin story as a settler in Africa and in South Africa. And so I take very seriously the role that space and place, and therefore, and the people that welcome people into their spaces in order to be theologically formed. I take that very seriously as part of our Christian discipleship and maturity and growth. And I think so. There's so many ways that we can do that. And Renee August, in her book Seeking Peace, speaks about reading the Bible in different locations, reading the word in the world, and how the very words of the Bible, when we read them, change in terms of who we're reading them with, and even where we're reading them. And I think that, very simply speaking, is how I believe that the issues of spatial injustice, of land injustice, and how we could even possibly overcome them together are, right at the core of how we allow ourselves, or how we actively seek to be formed theologically, and work out together who God is, what God's household and economy looks like, and what being faithful to that looks like. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Caroline.
So I want to ask you, Selena, the question. So I remember I had I visited a friend who was telling me about a 2-year-old who apparently took, I think it was a pond of some kind where there were small fishes. So this guy the 2-year-old took these fishes out of the water. And so the parents, in their confusion, kind of asked this guy, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why don't you put them back? So this guy answered this question in saying that Jesus will do this. Jesus will take these fishes back. And I think in most cases, you find us having that theology of a 2-year-old. And that speaks to, at times, these permissive ideas of theology, these unquestioned dogmas that we carry. And at times we know of them, at times we don't know, but they are there with us. But I mean, I'm wanting to ask Selena the question of what are some of the ways in which the current state of theological formation are problematic, or at least insufficient. And I mean, you can answer that from the work that you've done within your PhD and that.
Thank you. It's just a real honor to be here with you. Thanks for that, Nkosi. And I think your remarks, Caroline's remarks, just lead into, reckoning with the history of theological education and formation that have largely been the enterprise of those who came on the boat and with the gun, with the Bible, and determined how those spaces should be formed. And I think the challenge and the legacy of, historically, who has governed the creation of the theological education and formation spaces for people, and the institutions that have held the power to decide what should be taught and how it should be taught. And so these formations, in a sense, have been cloaked in religious traditions, often designed by a few, using a hierarchical approach to power that was kept the many in check, and also limited other ways of knowing, other ways of seeing and having perspective on faith, life. And so, having that, those limitations, these formations of institutions of theology at times have served the needs of churches with certain agendas and long traditions, and have not really adapted to the formation needs of the students who are hungering to bring change, who are hungering for a more just and equitable society. Churches are in need of broadening their social vision really to inculcate that good news. Theological institutions are in desperate need of internal renovation and examination, really to deliver much more generative education, which creates the conditions for more embodied scholarship, recognizing who is in the room and what they bring and the stories that they bring to that. So this idea of embodied scholarship as a starting point for those who would consider their own positionality, consider the historic positions and the structures of power, and trying to include the a fuller vision of the good news and the gospel and the city and where people live. So embodied scholarship is capable of taking on kind of death-dealing systems, I believe, to foster a more life-sustaining and organic places and spaces for a healthy ecological and human habitation. That's what theological education should be about. It's about our lived realities, about the whole of what people do. So it's time maybe to bite the hand of those deep-rooted systems which have reinforced this kind of messages of long-standing inequality and had an era of elitism and kind of a control in the academy, which has repressed the imagination of the next generation, I believe. So this is a call for theological education lenses which can wisely exegete the past, the present, and the future in our cities and in our spaces. And it calls us to move beyond just the survival and the well-being of a few to the survival and well-being of everyone, and to find out what flourishing really looks like. So yeah, that's some of what comes to mind in terms of the deficit. It's our systems, it's who is in control of those systems, it's how those places have been governed and guided for formation. We have to relook at all of that institutionally, through the church and all those people who have had an investment in theological education and formation. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
So good, thank you. Yeah, it feels like so much of this work is rooted in making visible these things that have been made invisible, whether it's our history or the people who have been forming what theological education looks like for all of these years and the positions that they come from. So many of these things are invisible, and it's not until we intentionally actually become aware of these things that we can bite the hand. I love what you said, and actually try and change these things. Mzi, so this is really exciting. ANISA and Mzi and Nkosi will be starting a theological formation center. You can tell us a little bit more about what that is, and there'll be space, I think, a bit later to speak into that more. But I'm imagining that you are starting this center because you are seeing some gaps or deficiencies in the current state of theological formation, and you envision the center to at least speak into some of those areas. So what are those gaps or problems in the current state of things that you are trying to address with what you're bringing in this, Mzi?
Thank you so much, Thandi, and thanks to everyone who is present here. And yeah, I've been waiting and anticipating for this space. It's good to share some thoughts and reflections together. And thank you for extending this invitation to us as well. So much looking forward to what will be unfolding in the coming few years and so forth. So thank you. So yes, firstly, I I want to make a disclaimer that that which we're trying to dream and experiment is precisely not to come up with solutions, right? So, and anyone that knows me, I'm very much reluctant to embrace a posture that embodies some sort of solutions. And I like the selection of words here in terms of the gaps, right? So I prefer the word cracks. So we work within the cracks. We work with fragments. We work in the context of, it also uses Marxist term, rupture, right? So we're always wanting to see where there is cracks or spaces that we can at least putting some air into this world that is suffocating, right? So the ours is to really try and explore what that means. And it does speak into, again, an important selection of words here, formation, right? So, and formation for me signifies vocation. So if we think about formation, we think about it in terms of how our lived experiences and our context and our communities shape us. So we begin really from context. The evangelical tradition begins from scripture. So I think we begin from context, and context is where, even to also echo William Jennings, who wrote a very beautiful book, After Whiteness, Theological Education, or Education in Belonging, right? So he says that theological education is supposed to open sites where we enter into the struggle, right? So we enter into this process. Theological formation is a way that gives us ways to enter into the context of struggle, or sites of struggle. So I think that's an important element to recognize, right? Because most of our theological formation wants to escape from struggle, right, into a parousia, the second coming, into a heaven that is street of gold, right? Rather than residing within the context that is a site of struggle. So I said that's why I want to emphasize the element of context. And that's what actually informs even how we want to think about theological formation center that we are hoping to establish. We have three things that we want to think about, which I think prompted this idea. The issue is that we still reside within the unasked questions. And so ours is the quest to ask more questions. And I think there are many unasked questions, particularly in our continent, in our country. There are so many unasked questions. And what are these unasked questions? I think one of it is this idea that some people have been circulating around, I think, even going back to the 50s and 60s. In a South African context, it might have been shaped mostly by the FISMA's fall context in 2015. But this idea of shifting the geography of reason. So what does that mean, right? So there's this idea that now this geography of reason is moving away from the global north into global south, right? So what does that mean? That's the question. And I think in taking that question that has been asked, imposed, suggested, I think we have to reformulate it in a different way, that it is precisely an unasked question, right? And how do we then begin to continue to reformulate that question in our own context, right? What does that mean? What does it mean for knowledge, for reason, that comes from context where colonialization or coloniality has been what shapes the condition of the people who are inhabiting that world, right? So I think that's the first position. So what does that mean? And I think we should take that seriously. What does that mean? Some people would say, well, that means taking seriously indigenous knowledges and so forth. But we have to then begin to say, are these knowledges from the South really considered knowledge, right? Or really considered reasoning? And what does that mean? So that's the question that we're trying to ask as we explore this center. Two is, again, linked to knowledge, which is there's a long history of the tradition that I'm part of, which is the Anabaptist, going back to 16th century. And the history is that it has had a posture of nonviolence and peace, peace church, believers church, and all these other elements, including the other elements that are alongside church, or even sometimes outside the church, like issues of conflict transformation, restorative justice models, and so forth, right? So all these could easily be traced back to this tradition. And this tradition has been focusing a lot in terms of how violent activities are affecting the world. But I think this tradition has also forgotten, or perhaps deliberately forgotten, so what we want to coin here as the epistemic violence, which is the violence against knowledge, which is the violence against thinking, which is the violence, even broadly speaking, the violence against being, right? Existing in the world for those who are residing in context shaped by colonization. So we want to then into this process and ask again this question. Perhaps it has been asked, perhaps it has not been asked, to say, how do we then begin to deal with ways of attempting to engage this question of knowledge violence, epistemic violence. And that's, I think, what we want to do. So in responding to the shifting of geographies to that which prioritizes global South context, we also have to say it hasn't been prioritized because violence has been imposed to people who reside in those spaces. And how do we then begin to think about violence in that sense, right? In a sense of physical as well as symbolic, as well as knowledge, as well as resisting people or denying people to exist, and so forth. So yeah, so this all sounds quite abstract, and I'm intentionally wanting to do so because it is something that we are, like I said, we are hoping to experiment. And it prioritizes Africans, and unashamedly so, because I think we need to take seriously our context to then begin to think about how we can create that form of knowledge or production that derives from African context, and that is initiated by Africans themselves. And so, yeah, so that's what we are wanting to shape.
Thanks for that, Mzi. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think it's really important to keep those in mind, lest we, so if we have to think about that boat from what you're saying, I think about when the people in that boat saw that humanity were created in the image and likeness of God, yet they continued to come and do what they did to Africa, or they continued to do what they did to Africans in slavery. And I mean, there was this continued reading of this text that humans were created in the image and likeness of God. There's this continued going to church, where on Sunday, where on Monday, people will be exploiting people again. What is wrong with our theology that it keeps on continuing with this? What are questions we're not asking, and all of that? So no, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Keegan, I'd like to bring you in here. So you also have started SJLA as a way to respond to some of these deficiencies that you saw within the theological formation space, particularly for those who were interested in going on to become ordained and lead churches? What were some of the gaps, those cracks that Mzi spoke of, or deficiencies that you were hoping to address with SJLA?
Thanks, Nkosi. Thank you so much for the invite to be with you all this evening. As I'm listening to you, to all of you share, I'm just like, wow, why am I even in this conversation? To be honest, I'm just out here trying to live this thing out, you know. But yeah, I didn't actually start SJLA. I was actually a student in SJLA from the very beginning, and I was actually I was part of SJLA and then came to the LUT course that some of you were part of in 2016. And I was really impacted, and in that 2 years, because I actually did my time over 2 years, I was really deeply impacted over that 2 years. I was confronted with my limited theology or my limited understanding of God. It was though I had all of these absolutes about God, and those absolutes didn't have any room to answer some of the really hard questions that people around me were facing. And so I had to pause. I actually took a break from LUT after doing it for like 6 months and asked if I could just pause. There was just too much happening inside of my heart and in my head, you know. It was really difficult for me. And then I came back the following year. And it was in that period, some of the people are on the school, and the warehouse community has been really significant in my own formation. Because for me, I think like I said, I'm trying to live this out every day. You know, like I don't think that my formation has ended. I think it's an ongoing thing. Even though I'm leading SJLA, most times I'm sitting there, encouraged, challenged, questioning my own stuff as I sit there, as people reflect and share. So it's been such a life-giving, rich community for me to be part of. But it was during that time at LUT that I started to think about this SJLA training course that I was part of, you know, which existed to form pioneering mission-shaped church leaders, those who were seeking ordination into the Anglican Church, particularly at that time. And what I was confronted with most times was it was like leadership development that was around best practice. Everything was shared from a place of these are the solutions to the problems that exist in the church. There was no wiggle room for questions. There was no space for doubt. There was no way to bring any context, you know, that into the conversation. Everything was just set and dry, cut and dry. And it was at LUT that I started to consider what it meant to live these questions out, you know, embody the questions we have, because there are no simple answers to them. And my picture of God, I guess, grew bigger. And so for the last 5 years or so, I sort of took over as the head of formation, which was to develop the curriculum for SJLA after I presented an idea. Our attempt has been to, I guess, bring the learning community to the context and the context to the learning community by exposing those of us who are on this journey of formation to practitioners and people who are busy engaging in this every day, so that our formation is more faithful to the place where we are. And so none of what we try to present has been around giving people answers, but creating space, more than anything else, for us to consider, you know, what is happening around us, and perhaps where God may be calling us, and what faithfulness looks like. Yeah, so I would say that's really what it is. We become a community more than anything else, you know. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Keegan. So great to hear more of the story than I knew. Sorry for the wrong information I was giving out, but it was, it is what it is. But Keegan, you are on this panel because you live this out every day. Like we see that you embody this in every cell of who you are. And I actually have been this year with the third years of the SGLA, and helping them with a writing project that they're doing, which is really reflecting on their SGLA journey, and hearing their stories and the way that they've grown and the ways that they've changed and how they've been impacted by this very, very intentional process of theological formation has been really a gift to see. And yeah, so much of this has been dreamed up and walked out by Keegan, among others. But yeah, thank you so much. That's beautiful. So I think we recognize that all of our theology and our theological formation is rooted in some sort of vision of what God's heart is for the world, who God is and what God's heart is for the world. Whether this is an image of God and an image of God's heart for the world, which includes a world where certain groups of people can dominate other people, which we've talked about, this boat theology, or whether it's a vision of who God is and a vision of God's heart for the world, which is a world where everyone can flourish. All of our theological formation is rooted in some sort of vision. And I think it's important to unpack what that is. But if our vision is, and what we believe God's heart is for the world is this vision of a flourishing world, of a flourishing space for all of creation, a vision of goodness between all things, between us and God, between us and creation, between us and each other. If that's our vision, then I think it's important then to think about the question of then what does our theological formation need to look like? How do we need to reimagine that in order to move towards this vision for the world? So back to Mzi, what are some of your dreams for the center, dreams for your work in ANISA and in other spaces perhaps, in terms of this? What is your imagination for theological formation in that space that speaks to that kind of vision for the world?
Thanks, Thandi. Yeah, I think there are 4 elements that are guiding this center. Right? So one is that the center places emphasis on the idea of research, and however you want to coin or frame research as, right? But it is in some ways that which people are given an opportunity to spend time thinking and talking and writing, right? Which is something that has never been given to most people, especially even here in South Africa. I mean, if you think about the history of South Africa, especially within Black communities, going back to even how knowledge has been regulated, right? Black speech is also already something that is regulated in many ways. It's regulated by the state. It is regulated in different ways. It is regulated by the 1953 Bantu Education or Black Education Act. So to really think and speak as a Black person is a privilege. Is something that that some have assumed that the realm of thinking belongs to them, which are those that, of course, he said, arrive on a boat. Right? But also there's a long history of settler colonization here in South Africa that those have not even left, but have been staying with us and have informed us how we ought to be, right? So again, the element is to say Blackness has been rendered invisible, and to speak as a Black person is to really ventricleize whiteness, right? It's the voice of whiteness that is coming from somewhere else, right? If you think about the process of ventriculist, right? Think of someone like Chester Missing and Conrad Koch, right? So the voice of Chester Missing comes from Conrad Koch, right? The voice of other puppets, such as someone like does puppet work on Jeff Dunham, whom I like, from American comedian. There's different puppets, right? So all those voices that he is playing are coming from a single person, but these puppets are basically echoing his voice, or him projecting different voices to this character. So that's how I think about it. That's how I think about Black speech in that sense. And this is how even someone like Frantz Fanon had said, well, there is no Black speech, right? It's almost always regulated through the regulation of whiteness. And so to create a space like that where you allow people outside this confinement and restrictions and threats of unable to speak and think, that's what we're trying to create space for, right? So that's one element of research, that's allowing people at least to begin to explore what thinking is. Thinking for me is also practical. It's not something you do in the lecture room or in the academy. It is done in communities. Already knowledge exists in many, many different communities, right? So how do you then begin to give people that ability to say, your knowledge matters, your thinking matters? So that's one element. The second one is that it becomes a resource space. So that's the second R. So hopefully this could be a space where resources are brought, but also where resources could potentially be dispersed, right? For churches, for organizations, for individuals who are thinking along these lines. And then thirdly, we are hoping to make this space a retreat, another third R. So it becomes a space where we can at least pause and breathe and sleep and relax and enjoy nature and spend time being refreshed. So it becomes almost like a whale, right? Or even in some people who talk about this image of a shoal, right, where it lies right in the middle of water, and it's just this dry patch where you can sit and relax and so forth. And then last R, the fourth R is remember, but this remember has a hyphen, right? So it's not remember as in terms of memory, but it's remember as in gaining, being remembered, going back into becoming a member of the community, regaining your engagement in communities. Again, almost like this idea of image of Christ as a body, right, where we are being membered, hands, eyes, and so forth. So we form this slowly as part of what we're trying to do. So these are the practices that hopefully will guide our practice, will guide our animations in trying to pursue and become these urban pilgrimages, urban sojourners who are trying to understand what African modern cities and doing theology within those African modern cities might look like. And so precisely a space that we're trying to create. So there isn't any fancy statements and alternative language but rather we want to dream otherwise possible impossibilities, right? So that which we're trying to dream about, experiment, is precisely impossible. But like Derrida, the impossibility of translation also requires the necessity to try it out, right? So there's impossibility and necessity, and that we are in this space, this threading space, right? That wants to explore the impossible possibilities that God has granted us. And so we want to follow that hidden voice of God in experimenting this.
Thanks, Mzee. Perhaps to Caroline, in the theological formation spaces that you've been involved in, how have you thought about and engaged with space more intentionally about theological, how have you engaged with space and more intentionally to be theologically formed by it towards broader vision of God's peace and justice for the world?
I mean, it's incredible to go after Mzee because he speaks about the like imagining the impossible, like these visions and dreams, and I think so much of what we just trying to do together, all of us on this call, is like allow ourselves to stay alive and to stay awake and to stay human in a world that's trying to shut us down and shut us up and put us to sleep and make us robots. And so I'm just like swept away by what Mzee is saying, because it's making me feel all of those things again, and it's calling me back into all of that. So I think to then say, how do we do that? Like, I was always taught that maybe the only theological formation I needed was if I went to church and received the word of God, if I had a quiet time and read the word of God quietly alone, maybe listened to some worship music and had devotion, maybe read some books, and that would be, being a good, faithful person in trying to kind of learn more about my faith. And then maybe if I wanted to study theology, I needed to go to a theological institution that was in a securitized complex and go and get my education. And so to go back to the work of staying alive, waking up from the slumber, remaining human, I think that's the work of doing theology and allowing yourself to be theologically formed by real places and spaces and people. So I think, maybe to say to Mzee, like, what you do is not what you're talking about is not abstract. It's keeping us alive. It's helping us breathe together, and even managing to do that on a virtual space. It's a privilege. Yes, it is a privilege. But I think it's something we need to dare to believe that we can do with one another. And so some like practical things would be, I believe very strongly in, if we're going to be in any kind of formal learning environment, that cannot be a shut away environment. Who spoke about now, like Keegan, I think, bringing the context to the learning room and the learning room to the context, like that's got to be happening continuously. So actually where we study together, where we debate together and speak together really, really matters. And so to do that all over the city in a variety of different places, to do what we call mobile classrooms, or the city as your classroom, pilgrimages, and actually physically move our bodies through the space, methodologies that we learned from our friends and comrades at the Ujama Center at UKZN, and to do that in place and spaces, not shut away.
to get churches out of their buildings. And what we described, I think also you needed to continue reading about a God who made people in God's image, all of those kinds of things, and should continue to pray and to continue to go to church. That actually there's a kind of cognitive, what I think we call cognitive dissonance that enables people not human. And so this work of theological formation in located spaces is about just continually not allowing ourselves to go back to sleep and to be shut down and to be dulled and dumbed. So yeah, there just many ways of doing that. And I just love learning. Every time I find a new way, I'm like, let's try it, I think, Keegan, you do that as well. Like the minute you see something done, it's like, let's do that with the people. Every time church asks us to come and do something, we ask the questions of, well, where are we doing this? Who are we doing this with? How can we get out of the shut away places?
Beautiful. Thank you, Caroline. I love that on this call, it is this group of people who are actually doing this, trying to reimagine what it could look like and experimenting and trying these different things. But that's a great segue to Keegan. So Keegan, yeah, I know from your experience with SGLA particularly, but your experience with LUT and other theological formation spaces, I know that you are continually learning and particularly learning from that perspective, like keeping your eyes out for things that can make that curriculum better for those students. So I would love to hear from you. What are some of the key things that you think are really central to this different kind of theological formation, for this vision for God's peace and justice for the world? What are the things that you think a theological formation process should not be without?
Thanks, Thandi. I wanted to ask Mzee if I can actually join the theological formation process that they're doing up in Joburg. It sounds like a place I really want to be.
Yes.
Thank you. I would love to come and learn. Thank you for this call. I've been really encouraged this evening in a big way, and so thank you for inviting me to be part of this call this evening. It's been good, really good. There's a few things I think that we have discovered at SGLA, and Caroline can also chirp in here as well, that we think is really important or a priority. Some of these haven't been mentioned before, but I think it's become part of our practices at SGLA. And the one is, everybody's saying it, but community is really important. And that's been a big part of my own formation. It continues to be that. And what we've done at SGLA is that even though there's a portion of the people that are there that are discerning this call to ordination, there's also a big part of the community of the students who have no desire to be ordained and want to be a church leader. But that's brought such rich reflection in that space, and it's formed the people that want to become church leaders in a unique way that's not present in sort of traditional ordination formation processes. And so we really appreciate that. But then it's also formed the others who don't have a desire to be ordained and help them think about the church in different ways. So that's that hybrid learning space has been really unique, but it's been wonderful. There's just been so much that's come out of that. So community, not just homogenous training or formation for one group of people, but open. We appreciated that. I think a formation process should problematize easy answers. So I sat in a meeting today where some of what was shared was really complex, but they often seem to be just a snap, quick response to like things that required more digging or just sitting in the difficulties or in the tension. And so I think it's important for us to problematize easy answers. It's not okay. Easy answers are actually in some ways not welcomed here because we're busy dealing with complex and difficult things, that requires us to actually be uncomfortable. And so that's really important. And then I think discernment is a practice, It's like if you want to be good at exercise, you actually have to go train. You don't just run a marathon. You have to practice it. And so I think that in the same way, discernment is something that we have to practice. We don't just say, God told me this. It's not okay. We need to spend time together with people who are not like us, people who have different opinions to us, who have different experiences than we do. And then we need to practice what we think God is saying to us together. And that is hard because exercise and practice is difficult. If you want to run a marathon, it's going to take you a long time to get to that place where you feel comfortable to run 42 kilometers. And in the same way, we need to practice and build practices of discernment. I think we need more learners who are leaders. I think that's important. People who, like Caroline just ended by saying, I really like to learn. And so because I like to learn, like I keep learning something new and then I want to implement it some way. And I love that about Caroline. And I think we need more leaders like that who are first learners, not people who come and are leaders, but those of us who can learn first so that we can lead and facilitate and hold space for other people and collaborate together. We can't do that if we just keep leading. And then I think it's also, lastly, two more things. One is that place is really important. Caroline alluded to that, so I'm not going to say more than that, but place is really important. Where we learn is really, really important. And she spoke a bit about the mobile classrooms. Those are really important to the SCHLA formation process, but I think they should be important to formation wherever we are. I think it's really, really important to hear the stories of the places where we are located. It's important, otherwise we can't be faithful leaders where we are. And then the last thing is that I think formation requires us to participate. Because we're always being formed, most times we are unconsciously being formed and we don't participate in our own formation. And a big part of what we try to do at SCHLA is we try to sort of help the students recognize that they participate in this process, that we're not out here trying to teach them things. They have to participate in this process of formation. And so I think if we become more conscious to our own formation, it could help us to become more faithful as leaders in the places where we are.
Selena, thank you so much, Keegan. Thank you for that. Selena, what has emerged from your PhD research in terms of reimagining theological formation?
I think bits and pieces of what so much of what has already been shared is very much a part of what my journey of discovery was about. And I mean, it was using, but it does have to do with kind of methodologies that help lead us into these kinds of communal processes and into learning communities. And so I did focus on something called the praxis cycle, which brings us through movements of immersion and social analysis and theological reflection and plans for action as rooted in our lived spirituality, as well as an indebtedness to kind of a womanist framework, which brings in conversation the intersection of race, class, and gender as one of the frameworks of fullness and embodiment. And but it's really about opening up the space for people to be, first of all, be participative in the theological process. It's not a banking method of coming from one person, but bringing our lived experiences, being reflective of our context very deeply, being very dialogical in our practice within learning communities and formation. kind of emerged from looking at some of what Keegan referred to as the LUT process and my own participation in that. So yeah, I kind of remixed some of the praxis cycle and the womanist thinking, and some key ideas around that is taking the context seriously in that immersion. I'm really thinking of a redemptive self-love where our own biography, our biographic sources of our family, of our communities, of our ancestors, it all plays into it. Our immersion and why are we here, and what is happening as we embody the work. The analysis helps us to have a critical reflection as part of our theological formation, so that we can re-examine assumptions, sort of ideological precedents, drawing from the social and the cultural history and the stories and the experiences of whether it is from an African woman's perspective or whatever perspective of those who are in the room, and being able to share those things and learn from one another, asking how do we understand, interrogate, and subvert some of those contemporary systems that come with discourses of domination and the way they've shaped us. And so that that theological reflection, includes a radical subjectivity where we bring all of these elements together, helping us to envision a new preferred future, bringing us into spaces of conscientization where we can begin to reimagine and resist those kinds of forces that have previously shaped us, so that we can bring together a planning for action that is built on a traditional communalism, drawing from the community and remembering the communal connections that help us to remember, to nurture, to protect, to sustain, and to liberate communities through acts of inclusivity and mutuality, reciprocity, self-care, and really emanating from the community. So it's kind of figuring out how to change social systems with that concern for justice and inclusion. And I drew from Katie Cannon, who speaks of 3 elements. She speaks of historical ethos, which is reading one's personal history and social history, that it helps us to debunk those detrimental formative myths and hierarchical constructions that are built on historical distortions. So our history and really taking that, those were the kinds of things that helped Christians turn a blind eye to slavery, not really understanding those systems. And so we take that into our theological reflection, our embodied pathos. She speaks of looking at the way in which, for example, Black women have embodied survival strategies and resistance for life in the face of death-dealing powers, so that, we begin to see the whole picture, bringing our God talk and our God walk together, to see how those connect. The communal logos, or the idea of being dialogical, the aspects of the classroom helping us to be in conversation with one another. And as you've already pointed out, being the city as a conversation partner, the context that we're in, what are we experiencing, what have we experienced, so that we can continue in this process of reformulation of questions continually, as we, in a sense, refining our questions is even more than getting to our answers in that sense. And and then I sort of added to that the idea of imaginative oikos, thinking of how do we live together with a new imagination for what's possible. And so those are some of the elements that I was able to focus in on.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Selena. And we have a special reading now, because Selena is going to actually read to us a small section of her PhD thesis, which speaks into this idea of reimagining what's possible. And she read it at a space we were together, I think it was last year, with some of the people who had done the Leadership and Urban Transformation course, and she read it out. And so we really wanted her to read it in this space today, where we're thinking about theological formation and what this can look like. So Selena, when you are ready, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, so again, the illusion of the slave castle, the Cape of Good Hope, and the dungeon in such close proximity. But the section is called The City at the Table in the Garden. It's an imaginative piece. What will it take to break the stranglehold of the church on top of the slave dungeon? It is legion. There remains evil to be cast out of our institutions, economic, social, political, intellectual, spiritual, epistemological, pedagogical, educational, environmental forms of evil, which must be cast out to make room for us collectively to be clothed and in our right minds again, to thrive in a place called home. Every vestige of the imagination of the castle of good hope at the center of the city must be displaced with a new imaginative oikos to guide our human and ecological relations into a flourishing, shared quality of life for all. Surely we need the grace, the grit, the strength, the courage, the dignity, wisdom, and unctionness of foremothers and forefathers to guide and discipline us into ethics of resistance and care for the city. There, they beckon us, gather us in from the whirl, violence, and chaos to come to the table. This is the round table of fellowship for every hue and color in our mother's garden to make home. In the way everyone can feast their eyes on the splendor of Table Mountain, we must uphold and create the embodiment of this inclusive table to advocate for justice and table fellowship in the folds of beloved community. Visionary symbols are essential to draw us into risky prophetic imaginings, pregnant with the power to displace haunting castle images. Can we collectively summon futures for fecundity and wonder, bathed in the loveliness of our mother's gardens and the sumptuous delights of our mother's tables? Only then can we teach to transform and advocate for the gathering of the beloved community in communities of praxis and circles of love, attentive to the domestic work being done by our heavenly parent, Creator God, a resurrected, wounded, healer, sibling Jesus, and our uncontainable teacher, Holy Spirit, along with our ancestors, busy forging dwellings in the city without a church, the new Cape Town. This is the work of crafting imaginative oikos, where the crystal clear waters of the Kamisa never cease to flow and refresh. And on each side of the river, abundant trees bear fruit, crops of fruit each month, and leaves for the healing of nations. Fellowship, nourishment, and satiation, dwelling together in the city that needs no temple, for it is the city at the table in the garden. There comes weeping, there comes singing, there comes laughing, there comes dancing. That's it.
Wow. Let it be so, Lord. Thank you. Yo, what a beautiful invitation, prophetic word, prayer, vision. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you have done and are continuing to do. Thank you to all the panelists for being part of this incredibly inspiring conversation. And I hope that this will give us food to continue living this out. And thank you to all of those who have joined us for this. So this will close this piece of the evening, but I'm now going to hand over to Colleen for the next part, which is the farewell to Nkosi / continuation.
Thanks, Thandi, and greetings to all my friends from near and far. Great to see you all. And thanks for being on this call, and thanks especially for the speakers. It was wonderful to hear your thoughts on the various questions. So I'm now stuck with this difficult task. On behalf of Mzwandile, who sends his apologies, Mzwandile has been struck from the face of this call by the power of Eskom, who decided load shedding had to happen right now. So he's passed this task on to me, and this is the hard task of being able to, for the first time, state in a public space aloud in front of a whole lot of people that Nkosi is leaving the warehouse. So it's obviously not the easiest thing to say. And I feel a little bit like, you always hear of parents who, when one of their children gets married, then they always say, you're not losing I think I'm one of the few people who's actually old enough to be Nkosi's mother, so I can speak, as it were, from experience. But you always hear people saying, you're not losing a son, you're gaining a daughter, or you're not losing a daughter, you're gaining a son. And I think in our case, we're not losing a son, but we're gaining a whole new family or a whole new community, actually. So that's the one thing that comes to mind as I introduce this section of the evening. And the other thing that comes to mind is when Jesus said to his disciples, go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. And I think we can be sure that that is what Nkosi is going to do. So we can proudly set him forth and push the boat out of Cape Town to another part of South Africa along the river. And say to him, go and make disciples. And we can be sure that he will do just that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask all of us to spend some time affirming and praying for Nkosi. And again, I looked up the word affirm, and the dictionary says this, it's got two meanings. And the one is to state emphatically or publicly. And they give some synonyms, which include declare, state, assert, aver, proclaim, pronounce, and attest. And the other one is to support someone by giving approval, recognition, or encouragement. So we're going to do both. We are going to state emphatically and publicly the approval we have of Nkosi, the recognition, the encouragement, and how we'd like to bless him. So we're going to combine. Often people tend to separate saying good things and praying good things, but we're going to do the two together, and that's how it's done biblically as well, where people are blessed, and the blessing is both ascending forth as well as calling from God to bless the person. So I'm going to invite all of us now, all of you, to state emphatically ways in which you'd like to encourage Nkosi and ways in which he has encouraged you, and at the same time offer from God the blessing for him, and offer to God the blessing you'd like God to give him. So I open the time now to the floor.
Sorry, I ran out of power. I had to change devices there. But yes, I think really, as I could not have, my PhD journey is a shared journey, because I was part of a cohort of a learning community with Nkosi that informed so much of what I learned and came to discover. And I think Nkosi's voice and wisdom beyond his years has been so important to so many of us, and continues to influence us in this work, really of being afforded this opportunity to stumble and to lament and to dance towards just city making. There's such a strong chord of bringing together the story and of lament and pain, and yet hope that comes through in Nkosi's wisdom and life in words. And it is informing, liberating circles and communities of praxis that is part of what Nkosi does and who he is. And I hope and pray that theological education can be in the hands of you, Nkosi, because you have such insight beyond your years. And I just feel like you bring an animation to the space of forming believers and transforming individuals and communities. And so it's been a joy. It's been a privilege to walk with you, to be with you in spaces, and I look forward to that continuing. But just your voice, your insight, your embodied scholarship is deeply needed for the transformation of our cities and our communities. And you create those inclusive spaces, and I just appreciate you for that. So thank you. And we will continue this journey of formation in South Africa together.
I will jump in. Never know where to start when you're talking about Nkosi, because there's so much to say. But I will say, so when I first heard that Nkosi was leaving the warehouse, I was incredibly sad. But because I heard that he was going to be with Mzee at ANISA, I was incredibly sad and incredibly happy at the same time, in two very conflicting states of emotion, because the thought of Nkosi and Mzee working together just makes my heart extremely happy. Just that, and I mean, there doesn't need to be anything else, but what comes out of that, I know, is going to be so beautiful. But Nkosi has been in this conversation around theological formation. Nkosi has been such an integral part of my theological formation. And I often think about the warehouse building, when we used to have a building, and the office that we shared. Linda is also on the call, and she is also part of that office. And just the conversations that we used to have in that space, and I mean, of course, it stretched beyond that office, but the perspective that Nkosi brings, the things he sees that often other people aren't seeing, the kind of things that he holds up for people to take notice of that they haven't taken notice of before, the way that he can open up scripture and make it come alive, the ways that he can open up the context and force you to be face to face with things that somehow life allows you not to be, but that are there and demanding our attention. And so he is, in any good theological formation curriculum, he is an essential part that I think everyone should be exposed to. And so I'm excited for more of the world to experience this as this center is developed, and as thought and love and dreams and vision and imagination go into it. I'm so glad that you'll be part of that, Nkosi, because I think, yeah, the theological formation that you have been in my life has given me a theology that is more about liberation and about humanization and about a world where everyone can flourish and be who God has created them to be. And yeah, I'm really grateful for you and for that.
I'll go. Connected to Thandi, because Nkosi, even though we don't spend a lot of time together, every time I'm with him in his presence, I genuinely leave a deeply challenged. I have to be honest, a lot of the time, Nkosi says things, and sometimes I get so deeply offended, you know. Maybe I'm reading a post that he's written something, or I overhear him have a conversation, and I mean, most times I sort of need to check myself, and it's not what Nkosi is saying, but it's the things in me that's offended. It's those things that have been unlearned and uncovered. It's those absolutes that I was talking about earlier. And so I just wanted to say, Nkosi, thank you for always just being yourself, for being honest, for I know maybe you don't see this way, but for being brave, for saying the hard things. Some people may think you're provocative. I don't think that's your intention. I just think that you're such a deep thinker, you know, like a miner, uncovering the things that are at the deeper level, because most of us are looking at it from the top. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being that person. I think you've played that role in so many of our lives, and thank you for challenging my stuff all the time, my theology, you know, my picture of God, my ideas of scripture, you know, even though I'm part of this community, and sometimes you can sort of think you maybe, you know, you're sort of further along the journey that you are, and then of course you say something and then you realize, snap, wait, let me just step back here, because whatever I'm going to say is just offense. That's actually not about Nkosi. And so thank you. And I'm just excited for the community there, for the leaders that are going to be formed there by some of the things that you have been thinking about, some of the stuff in your heart, the way you embody that stuff. So praying for you, bro, like big time. Thank you.
I would love to tip in and say that there's so much to say to Nkosi, but I'm just going to limit it. My life was basically changed after I met Nkosi. But Terry, sorry, you're not leaving to the moon. But just, yeah, Nkosi, I've learned so much from you. I knew the day I met you that you were going to be a transformative part of my life. And what I love and respect you enormously as a friend, as a brother, as a leader. What I find the most moving about you is that you are one of the kindest people I know, and you speak truth so truthfully and directly, and you don't often get that juxtaposition in one person like it is with you. So your truth and your kindness, I know that you're motivated by love. I know that you love people so much,
and I've heard you, you know, raging, but there's love. It's love that drives your passion for the world to look different, and I've always been inspired and challenged by that. Yeah, and just how much you've led so many people. Same as Keegan, I'm often thinking, whoa, and then I'm unlearning something. This is good. So yeah, so I've just loved being part of your life and your family's life. It was a privilege to work with you, and it's a privilege to be your friend and sister, and I'm very, very grateful. And I knew that I would be changed when I met you, and I know I will continue to be changed and become more of how God wants us to be as community, because of your witness and who you are, just in every fiber of your being. And thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will be wishing you well in the north, but look forward to seeing you back here soon.
Linda stole what I wanted to say about love. So love, amen. But I want to actually tell Mzee something. It feels like it's a sort of a piece of information that you probably already know, but you need to be aware of this. If you're ever running something where you want to invite Nkosi to speak into something, whatever, the first thing he's going to say is no. He hasn't got anything to say. Like no, he doesn't. And then when the time starts, he will maybe start reluctantly saying something, and then the processing will continue, and then he will take the people who are listening to maybe to the moon, like to another dimension, to a whole new universe that many of the people in the space in the room haven't ever inhabited before. And then he will start to develop the different theological and actual like action points under each one of those things, and like everything will change. And then mid-sentence he will stop. Or maybe not mid-sentence, but that then it will suddenly be over. and everything will be left just absorbing and vibrating. And you, dear Mzee, will be there to continue with whatever's happened in the room since then. I'm not going to unpack what's going on for Nkosi and all of that, except that we know it's motivated by love. But yeah, we've always enjoyed the journey. My favorite and worst thing is to speak directly after Nkosi, which is often what happens for me, because I'm absorbing what I'm learning in that new universe that he's just taken me to. But yeah, thank you, Nkosi, for the many, many moments that we've been able to do that together. It's always been so much fun. And I don't want to use that word lightly, because often the things we're talking about are not fun things. But there is always a deep joy and a lightness and an immense love to the work of speaking of these things and doing these things together. So yeah, I look forward to more of that, and being in and watching how Mzee deals with the the end of your sentence.
I like the way Mandisa was laughing the most at what Caroline was saying.
Yeah, I was going to say two things, and the one all was about how everything you do is based on love and rooted in love and is born from love. So I won't say more than Linz and Caroline have about that. But the other one was wisdom. Because I also think that often doesn't, like, that's so the prophetic gift that you have of speaking into spaces and disrupting, yeah, exactly, wise man, has to be paired with love, and in this world is rarely paired with wisdom. When to say, how to make meaning, how to bring love out of a place of disequilibrium. And so I'm reflecting in our internal community. We were in a really difficult stage at the beginning of this year with financial issues and things like that. And Nkosi, this is the gift you're getting, Z, was able to hold a space and give language and interpret what was happening with us, and give language and a holding place for how we could imagine ourselves deeper. And I'm running out of words. The phrase he coined, I believe, is the loving and beloved community. And at that point, that is all we needed to know. That is all we needed to know, is that we are a loving and beloved community, and whatever comes after that is all within our ability to do this together. And so I wanted to affirm that your huge insight and wisdom and the ability to make meaning and to give language and symbol and metaphor that just keeps giving birth to more life. Yeah, this is not goodbye. Love you.
So while we're waiting for somebody else, I'll just read one from Charlie. One of my favorite moments of learning from you, Nkosi, is from a breakaway session at the second Justice Conference in Mitchell's Plain. There was a guy speaking about the difference between colored and black people. And you stopped the guy. If I can get it. You stopped the guy so beautifully with so much authority and love, saying, "Just stop it, brother, stop it. We are together, we are the same." Sorry, I've lost it. Yeah, anyway.
I can carry on that one where you got lost.
Yes, thank you. I don't know how to read it.
Saying, "Just stop it, brother, stop it. We are together, we are the same." And I felt like you were speaking to something deep inside me. Thank you for who you are and helping people heal. Peace and love to you and your family, my leader.
And Selena says, "Thank you, Nkosi, for who you are and all you bring to the world. Great to be with you, friends." Sorry, I must go now.
I think I'll jump in now. So I don't know also where to start. I think like you, Colleen, you were saying you are letting go of your son. So in my family, I'm the last one. So I always feel like everyone else is condescending upon me. And so for me, in a sense, I've gained a brother, a younger brother, whom I have been watching and seeing how and I think a lot of people here were talking about wisdom, how he is able to uniquely and in a sensitive way, but rather thoughtful way, able to penetrate complicated conversations and point out significant things so he's able to see that which we cannot easily see and reveal it to us. I remember in one of the justice conferences, I was not there, but a friend of mine from here in Johannesburg was part of that gathering, and in that space he texted me or WhatsApp me and said, there's this guy here who's talking about shit theology. there's this guy that you must really meet. So, and I haven't met Nkosi. I've never heard of him, and since that, I mean, that the time I met Nkosi was almost like we knew each other for a very long period of time. And so that's why I unashamedly would say he's first and foremost a brother to me. And in that, I have enjoyed every single word, every single sentence, every single concept that he's able to present whenever we have conversation, whether in a group setting, together, having coffee or drinking some other Eucharistic drinks. And in all those conversations, I have always come out there, have learned a lot of things and able to unlearn a lot of things in myself. So in that, I really want to call you an organic philosopher, as Gramsci would say. Right? So you are an organic philosopher, and I think the space of formation in Cape Town and the warehouse has also been an incredible gift that is able to gift us with, and as we explore this new journey, exploring this work together, I also want to thank the context of Cape Town and the warehouse. But I think most importantly, I want to thank Mandisa and the two precious girls. I think they are the ones that have formed you even much more deeper. And Caroline, if Nkosi decide to do those mischievous things, I just call Mandisa. That's my strategy. And so with that, I look forward to a beautiful, beautiful time with you. I hope to learn from you as I always learn, and I hope to get to know you even much more deeper as we do this work together. So much love, my brother.
Thanks, Mzwan. Is there anybody else? So Megan also has to leave. It has been so beautiful to just quietly listen and witness. Do you have one more person? If not, I'd like to read a blessing to Nkosi and then hand back to Thandi. So the blessing is from the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 4, verse 12. And it's a blessing of Paul on Timothy, the young disciple. And I've added a few of the things onto what Paul said to Timothy. So 1 Timothy 4, verse 12, don't let anyone think less of you because you are young, but be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. And to that I'd add, and in your wisdom, your insight, your anger, your honesty, your kindness, your determination, and your heart. And so we give thanks to God for you and place you in God's hands and in God's footsteps. And may the light guide you. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for holding that, Cole. Yeah, beautiful things ahead. Yeah, thank you all for being here tonight with us as part of this conversation. It has been recorded and it looks like everything's gone well, so you will be able to listen to it and share it later if you would like to. But yeah, such a special evening of community and coming together, and sharing these things that we're passionate about and that have a real impact in the world. So blessings to the ANISA and Joburg chapter. We are excited for continued collaboration and to see that how this can grow and flourish. We're looking forward to what's next. As we get smaller, we get bigger. And everyone else, yeah, thank you for being part of such a special evening and time together. Much love. May the recording stop.